Alexander,
Yes.
please tell me which gestures are commonly used in your country, and maybe give a piece of advice to our travelers.
Okay, so the first thing when it comes to gestures, I find that the gestures that we'd use in South Africa, for example, where I come from, are very similar to the gestures that you'd use in Russia. So what that means is that when you're traveling and you're traveling abroad, people use the same gestures. So it's very seldomly that you're going to get into a situation where you're doing something and people are taking offense to it, for example. Okay, so let me just answer some of the questions that as they arise. Right. So the usual when you're traveling, I find that this is a gesture that you'd use quite often. Thumbs up, it's always good. And then thumbs down. You don't really do thumbs down. I mean, it's a bit rude when you do that. So you know, unless you're joking, you know. What do you think of your food? You're not going to go, I don't like it. You're not going to give it a
Have you ever seen this gesture?
You know, not really. Mostly with friends and that kind of thing. So just in terms of mannerisms and body language is obviously very important when you're traveling. Just some customs that you'd find in South Africa. I think it's similar in Russia. First of all, you shake hands. I notice in Russia that you take off your glove if you're a man. Take off your glove, and you know it's rude to shake someone's hand with their glove on. For example,
of course,
we don't have that problem. We don't have that problem in South Africa too much because it doesn't get as cold there.
Yeah,
so you're not wearing
you're
gloves.
still lucky.
Absolutely. So sometimes it depends on your cultural group. In South Africa, we've got 11 languages, which means is that we use a lot of body language when we speak, or gestures, because not everyone can understand you. English would obviously be the predominant language in South Africa. So I just put this in here. It's funny, when you meet an acquaintance, you normally give them a kiss on the cheek. Some creepy dudes will like kiss, you know. It's fine. I mean, you know, amongst family it's fine, but if it's, I'm sure every family's got the weird uncle that wants to kiss all the girls on the lips, kind of thing. And then the other standard ones, obviously, no, yes. You can smile. You're allowed to smile. That's a good thing. Smiling actually gives you a free pass in many situations. So I always suggest smiling. No one thinks it's weird. So don't worry about that. And then I'm just trying to think of some other things that I mentioned here. So when you at a restaurant, for example, some of the things that you wouldn't do. You know, when you're calling a waitress or a waiter, you don't go like. That's the normal thing. Click your fingers, try to get their attention. That's just rude. I think it's also rude in Russia. You know.
Of course.
When you, for example, we're also quite chivalrous, or I suppose in South Africa, men would let ladies before them. So, you know, through the door, you'd let someone through the door first. Interestingly enough, in black culture in South Africa, a man enters the room first. And in the old days, that was seen, or traditionally, a man would enter the room because there might be danger in the room, and the man obviously sees if there's danger in the room, and then everyone else follows behind him. So it's just a cultural thing in that sense. Another interesting thing, I was taught this by my granny. She always said that if you're walking down the street with a lady, the man always takes the street side. I think that was in the old days. If there was danger in the street,
of course,
the man would
with a lift. Yeah.
It's a similar thing. And then also something that would be quite similar when you ride the metro here in St. Petersburg, for example. You'll find that if you're young, you give up your seat for someone that's older than you, or a lady. For example, if there's a young lady, I won't give up the seat for her if she's the same age as me. Maybe if I'm trying to impress her. the other day I was at the metro and there's this girl like she was so offended. Man. She was so offended that I took the seat in front of her. I'm like, we.
Of course, I think you shouldn't do it unless the woman is pregnant.
Pregnant.
And you definitely see it. Yeah, of course you should, but no other situations.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, another question to you, Alexander. Do we have something in common? I mean, the same gestures in Russia and English-speaking country, your country, or maybe give us any examples.
Okay, so I was just considering this question, and I said it in the beginning of the talk here, is the gestures are very similar. I will later on give you some of the things that are interesting about Russian particular gestures. I'd say they're definitely common, and when I think of that, especially hand gestures, you'll notice that even the way that I'm talking, and that's probably a cultural thing from where I come from. I'll use my hands, I'm going to explain what I want to do. If I want to let you go in front of me, I'll show you with my hand if I'm thinking about something, or I find that they say that 70% of communication is non-verbal, and these will be non-verbal cues that you'd have. So, a thing like, how much I'll pay me, or how much is something, you'd go like that, people would understand what that is. I just use the example of using WhatsApp. They've got a lot of signals on WhatsApp. I'll actually talk about one of those things at another.
Are they called WhatsApp gestures, really?
Well, I was just thinking, everyone knows what WhatsApp is, so it would be like it's a universal one. I was actually checking out WhatsApp signals, and one of the things that I still can't work out is when someone does that. I don't know what that is. Where I come from, when someone, I think it's we have this thing in South Africa or in English countries. We'd say something like, "I'm holding thumbs for you." So you'd go, I'm literally holding my thumb. It's like a sign of luck. I want you to get the job holding thumbs. That's something that you'd say. Cool.
Okay. And do we have something different? So show us some gestures you've never met in Russia.
Okay, so I find this quite funny. So I'm chatting to my wife, who's Russian, and I was asking her, what do you think that's different? And it's something that I hadn't noticed, but it's something that she picks up. For example, if you ask me, count to 10, how many is something? And I will go I'll start counting.
Do it like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
And it's, you see, that's different. So I'll go 1, 2, I open my fingers like that.
Incredible.
Another interesting thing, if in South Africa, because we've got different nationalities and different backgrounds, if you speak to someone who's Afrikaans, which is a derivative of Dutch, for example, or a boer, that's commonly what Russians would understand, they would start counting from there. They go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just a strange thing, yeah. Okay. So that would be the major difference. Yeah.
So you can try counting like that. Okay. And are there any gestures in here and in the South Africa that look the same but mean very different things?
Well, I think generally speaking, you're not really, particularly in South Africa, you're not going to get into trouble with things that you'd naturally know or naturally do. I was on a tour in South Africa, and this is unrelated to South Africa, obviously. And part of the tour, I mentioned something is very full. And how I describe full, where I come from, I'd say full. So I'd do that, and I go, something is, it means it is, there's an expression, it is brook full. The lid on the bottle full. So that's the expression. And I had some Brazilians on my tour, and this meant something very different. I'll let you work out what that means. So that is a misunderstanding. One of the let's just see here. I was just thinking another one. Normally, you know that two. If you say it two, and it's very different if you go two.
Yeah.
I don't know if that means something different.
So don't confuse.
So like two, and then this also means victory. So you know, it's
like this, yeah.
Victory, but you know, victory, that would probably be more something of UK, and the famous Winston Churchill. There's a famous scene of him going like that. But there's a recent movie of Churchill, and one of his assistants pointed out, Churchill, that is victory, not that. There he was. It was like up yours to the Germans.
I think you understand what this gesture means, but I don't show it to you, of course. Okay, thank you, Alexander. Tell us a real story related to gestures. Did gestures help you to be understood?
Okay, so I find this quite funny. So in my life, I've also been a waiter in restaurants, serving people. I think it's the best career to have if you want to learn to serve people in a restaurant environment. You've got to be very humble and patient and all that kind of thing. But the one evening I had an Indian family from India, and it is quite amusing. So I'm serving them. Would you like this? So I'm making suggestions, and every time I go, would you like something or do you want something? Instead of like nodding yes, they'll go. It's like a no, I'm not interested, and I found it quite amusing. I kind of like, in first I'm like, what are you doing?
Did you ask?
No, I was too embarrassed. I actually had to find out what is going on, but it was the first time that I'd ever experienced it. And I think Indians themselves might find that quite amusing. It's like a head dangle, like yes, that's how I think about something. So that would be one thing that would be a bit strange.
Of course, for sure. And do Russians use gestures when communicating with you, and what kind of?
Okay, so the most peculiar Russian story I found, and I noticed this the other day. I was walking in the street and I was talking with my friend. He was showing me some architecture. He's also actually a tour guide. And I was walking past and I was talking English to him, and some Russian guys overheard it, and we started chatting, and where are you from? And I'm from South Africa, and we chat. And these guys were drunk. It was in the day, and it's not a typical Russian scenario. I mean, it's not like you get drunks everywhere during the day, but it was just amusing. And while I'm talking to them, they were quite drunk. As we were talking, there's this. So I was talking to these two dudes, and there's this guy going on a little scooter round and around us. So they were pretty drunk. Mm-hmm. And the guy kept on saying, "I apologize, we're very drunk," and he's flicking his. I thought that was a legend, and I realized that comes from. The Peter, the architect, who fixed up the angel on top of the Peter and Paul spire. So it is like kind of like actually did it. So I thought it was a joke, and freaking okay. So that's a St. Petersburg thing. I don't know if you do it all over Russia, but that's.
I think so.
Is it?
Yeah. I know that, for example, in the Novgorod region and somewhere else, Russians are doing this.
One of the things that could mean two different things. I was just thinking about now is, normally you go, okay, that's enough, but it also looks like, kill it, kill the video. Kill the video. No. It's like kill the lights. What?
Interesting.
There's quite an amusing Facebook one other day with a little kid, and he was doing this little cut across the throat. You rather avoid that. That's not particularly Russian, but anyway.
Okay. And how can gestures help if you don't know the language? Share with us your own maybe travel experience.
Okay, so my travel experience is like this. So I come to Russia, and obviously I'm English native speaker, and Russian is very different. So, I mean, Cyrillic, everything is different. There are a few words that are very similar. I was actually surprised that words sounded Dutch, or at least German, like broekie for pants. I understand that from Dutch. Kunstkamera, the art room, I'd understand that. Three, that comes from Latin, three. So I'd get those things. But what I find is when you travel, that people are extremely forgiving of your English. So it's one thing, even my pathetic Russian, which I'm too embarrassed to even say, I'm still not confident enough to have a conversation. I'm starting to hear Russian all the time, obviously, and understand what's been said. So what I'm trying to say is that if I was speaking broken Russian to you, you'd be like, what do you want to say? You might get a little bit frustrated, if anything, but it's you are forgiving of what I want to say. So all across the world, I mean, I go to Georgia. They've got a different language in Georgia, and where I've got no Russian, no one speaks English, and you end up communicating with your signs. I want to eat. I want to go to the loo. You do something else for that.
Don't Georgian people speak Russian?
No. A lot of Georgians do. I'm just saying, like in a scenario that is different to Russia.
Of course.
Obviously, it's an example for me as an English speaker. I mean, not so much for Russians going down there.
Yeah, not
But what I'm trying to get at is that your level of English is not the most important thing in communicating. It is you being willing to make mistakes and also just speak with your hands. You literally trying to describe what you want to do with your hands. So just an interesting example of that one. It does depend on when you are traveling. I was just thinking, I'm going to add that in now, is, for example, in South Africa, if you're asking for directions for somewhere, it might be that you're in a dangerous place. You won't know that as a tourist, and the South African might not think about telling you. So I would research that if you're in a sort of place that is not physically, you weren't physically safe in this place. So that's not so much a gesture, that's more like a hint of traveling there, for example. Okay, just to reiterate, WhatsApp examples are good ones. They are pretty universal, and talking with your hands is important. And when you approach, just a tip, when you do approach someone, you're like, I go, Angliski. Do you speak English? And then you kind of like gauge, and then they say, and normally people say, and they'll just start speaking anyway. And I think that's the approach that you need to do. It's just like, I'm not a threat. You don't come up. What I find is that because things can get lost in communication, just be passive. Just don't come across as aggressive or direct. Because when you're learning a new language or doing a new language, you only learn the direct actions. But you'll find that in English culture or English, we're not so direct. Unlike Americans. Americans are direct and they're loud and they're going to be talking to you loudly. English people, I find they call it self-deprecating humor. It's kind of like you meeker and more polite when you talk. So that would be the same in South Africa. So when you approach someone, drop your voice, just be more passive. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We'll follow your advice, of course, while traveling. And which gestures can help us to communicate effectively if we don't know the language? For example, you recommended being polite and always smile and so on. Maybe you can you can show us any exact gestures that can help us to communicate.
Okay. I've mentioned the first one, the basics, yes, no, smile. I find a lot of the time, because you don't know how to get someone's attention. So one of the things that is a bit creepy is if you go tap someone on the back.
Oh.
It's like, hello. It's like people find that a bit weird. So you try and grab someone's attention before you start talking to them. And obviously face them and be polite. And just something that comes to mind now about traveling is it's very interesting. We naturally make eye contact to connect with people and gestures. It's an interesting thing in South African culture. I was talking about black culture, for example. You don't look a man in the eye, an older man in the eye. You kind of bow and you look down. But I think that people are quite forgiving.
Somewhere here.
Yes, you do make eye contact. I mean, it is creepy looking into someone's eye. You kind of feel a little bit it's invasive into your space. So your space and talking to someone is very important. How close you get to them. You don't want to be too close. I find that in cities, it's an interesting phenomena. They say that people that live in cities, your I think they call it your safe distance from people is a lot closer than people that grew up in the country or perhaps in the village where you've got lots of space. So you'll find one of the things that I find just living. I grew up on a farm in Africa, and we had lots of space. And then when we talk, we use big gestures. We're talking. I often find myself, even when I'm doing a tour in the city, I'll talk and I'll bump someone because I'm talking and I'm unaware of that space. In the city, you'll find that because you're in the metro, you're close, you're going through the streets, your safe body zone is a lot closer. It's something that you must always consider when you're traveling and talking to people. You don't want to get too close, but you also don't want to be too far because people obviously need to try and understand and help you. Another interesting thing is, and this is it's a myth buster. People, they say that you generally don't touch strangers. You physically don't touch people. But I find that it's a myth. I think that people are human, and if I reach out and touch someone, I'm making a connection with them. So obviously not creepy touching, you know what I mean? You're not going to go and stroke someone's face, while you're talking to them. But you might just do a little shoulder pat, or, I find it, particularly with other guys, I like maybe put it, like a little pat, arm, etc., etc. Just to feel like they're part of, I'm connecting with them.
Okay, thank you. All the questions we answered already. Just the ending. I'd like to ask you to tell us a few words about your excursions, because we are quite interested.
Okay, cool. Before I do that, can I just, because I don't think you can actually see it on the screen in it. I just wanted to point out these things that I've written over here. So it's quite academic.
Okay, I will finish. Just say some words, and we can...
Okay, can wrap up that. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so my tour, So the common question that I face is, why should we go on a tour with a native English speaker in our city of St. Petersburg? Like, what can you tell me about where I live? And I face that all the time. And it's the same thing across the world. It's like, what do you know about where I live? What makes it better? First of all, I always answer to people, what do you know about a place? Its history, more than someone who can read. You know,
Okay,
you can read the stories.
do people speak with you in English? Yeah.
My tours are all in English,
Yeah.
and I get a lot of. For example, I had a German on my tour today, and he actually had to say to me, this guy was from the UK, and his friend was German. And his German is his English is very good. But he had to stop me and say, you're using too big words, can you just talk a little bit slower for me? Which is something I have to be conscious of doing, so I have to speak a little bit slower and maybe use more hand gestures in describing what I want to do. So I do my tours in English. It takes you 90 minutes. I start at Alexander Column. My name's Alexander, so start, you can't forget where it is, right in the middle of Palace Square. It takes you 90 minutes, and I always talk about revealing things that are in plain sight. So things that you'd think that you'd know about your city. Sure, you know your history, you know what the buildings are, and I'm sure you know more than me. But I find some symbols, and I find that, exquisite architecture, that kind of stuff. But I find some symbols repeating themselves within the area that I walk. So it's Palace Square, Alexander Garden, Senate Square, Nevsky, the popular tourist route. And you think it's kind of boring, but I like telling stories, so it's all about the stories that you tell of the place. I've got a very interesting story that I have been telling recently. So if you come on the tours, I'll tell you about it.
Okay, for sure. Goodbye. See you.
Goodbye.